An important effect that you could relate to the study of VR as an object is the so-called Proteus effect. So Proteus was a sea god in Greek mythology. Homer, in his work The Odyssey, refers to him as the old man of the sea, or also as the herdsman, the shepherd of the sea beasts, mostly the shepherd of the seals. So if you haven't read this work by Homer, please do so in general, because it's a very important and great piece of literature. Most importantly here is that this sea god, Proteus, could change his shape, his form, into all sorts of different beings. So one characteristic that he had was that he could foretell the future, he could predict the future, and therefore many people came to him asking him about the future, what will my future look like? But he didn't always want to answer those people. You get a little tired of answering all of them all the time. So he would change into a different shape. He would, for instance, take the shape of a tree or of an animal, of a pig, and then people wouldn't recognize him, and then he wouldn't be bothered by all those people constantly asking him, what will the future be like? So most important thing here, he could transform himself into different beings. Of course, this is also something that you can do in virtual reality, right? You can sort of embody an animal or a different person, even a tree or some coral, as we have seen. And now the question is, does that then change people's behavior? And in a study by Nikki and Jeremy Bailenson, they looked at this so-called Proteus effect. They looked at if you now place yourself in a different body, will you start behaving differently compared to how you typically behave in the real world? And one nice finding they observed, for instance, is that if they placed somebody in the virtual body of a taller person, so imagine you're wearing this virtual reality headset, and now all of a sudden in virtual reality, you're a bit taller than you are in everyday life. What will this do to your behavior in the virtual environment? What they observed is that then if people are a bit taller in VR compared to their height in the real world, they all of a sudden start to be a bit more confident than they are in the real world. And this is one example of what they call the Proteus effect. If you embody different person, or for instance, if you embody someone that really very much looks like you, but is a bit taller in this case, you start behaving differently. So as Proteus, you would embody something or someone that's a bit different or completely different compared to yourself. And this will change your behavior in VR. If you look at this in this way, then it's an example of studying VR as an object, right? How do people behave in VR itself? If you then take this knowledge to train people for the real world, to train people's behavior for the real world, then it becomes using VR as an application, right? But here we're mostly interested in VR as an object, how people behave in the virtual environment. In this case, if they're embodying someone or something that's different compared to how they typically are in the real world. So that's the Proteus effect. So you can make people change their behavior as a function of sort of what they look like in a virtual environment. This is often done using a trick, and this trick is a virtual mirror. So imagine you're walking around or you're looking around in a virtual environment, and all of a sudden you see a mirror in VR. And what's nice in that case, of course, is that in the real world, when you look into a mirror, you typically see yourself, right, mirrored. But in a programmed digital environment, you may look into a mirror and see someone different, and then you might get the feeling that you are this different person. So for instance, you encounter a mirror, you look into this mirror, and all of a sudden you see someone who's a bit taller than yourself. Well, this research then shows that you become a bit more confident, for instance, if you're negotiating with someone in this virtual environment. Of course, you can also think of all sorts of other manipulations. So all of a sudden you can have a different skin color. What does that do to your behavior? To the fact how you see different people, for instance, you can have a different gender in VR. You look into this mirror, all of a sudden you have a different gender. What does this do to your behavior? So in this way, there are many examples in which people can embody different people, or maybe even animals, as we have seen. Perhaps even you can be a tree in virtual reality, because you enter this virtual world, you look into a mirror, and all of a sudden you see that you're a tree. What does this do to your behavior? if you study this in VR itself, how people then start behaving in VR itself, it's an example of using virtual reality as an object of study itself. And after, the next step is that it can be used as an application. So for instance, if you embody someone that has a different skin color, you might start seeing the world from this different perspective. This might then change your behavior in the real world afterwards. If that's your goal as a researcher, someone who makes those virtual environments, then it's really an application. So this also, I think, nicely shows that those three categories that we have, right? VR as an object, VR as a method, VR as an application, they're sometimes related. Sometimes researchers start with studying VR as an object, but then they realize, oh, this might also have some nice applications for the real world. Or we could also use this approach to answer fundamental theoretical questions that we have. Then it becomes the use of VR as an object. So they're not completely distinct always. They're often very much related. And as a function of the research question that you have as a researcher, you might use VR in one way or in another.